Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review The Great Cat Massacre and Other Episodes in French Cultural History by Robert Darnton. There's a blurb on here that says, a brilliant work of popular history. While it is a brilliant work of history, I don't know how popular it is. This is not a topic that I imagine that many people are going to jump on. So, what is this book? The author has a very ambitious goal in mind, and that is to help the reader to place themselves into the mind of an 18th century French citizen. And he does this through a series of essays. The first essay deals with Peasants Tell Tales, the Meeting of Mother Goose, and it talks about how the French, German, and English used folk tales in different ways. For example, the English tended to have clever outcomes. The French tended to have lots of fairy tales, while the French had tricksters, and the Germans had a lot of bloody violence. Take that for what you want to. This chapter introduced me to the concept of the Arne-Thompson Index. Arne, A-A-R-N-E, dash Thompson, T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N. And that is an academic index which ranks folk stories with a code. So if it says story element 301, someone that understands the Arne-Thompson Index will know what that means, and will know that a 302 is related to a 301. Unfortunately, the only references I can find online to the published indexes, though very similar to the Arne-Thompson or the Arne-Thompson itself, are because they're academic texts, which means very small print runs, which means very large prices. So at the moment, I don't have access to one of these Arne-Thompson indexes. I hope that I will someday, because it sounds very interesting. And it's interesting in this chapter to see how the earliest folk tales that they could find, for example, they give an example of Little Red Riding Hood, bears almost no resemblance to what we recognize in the Brothers Grimm. I apologize for the noise outside. In the original that they were able to find, the earliest one that they could record, the Little Red Riding Hood, her grandmother is murdered by the wolf before she gets there, and she is served her grandmother as a snack by the wolf, who then undresses her, gets her into bed, and kills and eats her. It is not the story we are used to, and there is no Red Hood in that particular story. And, there are like 35 different versions of this story. So when people ask, how can they tell this story over again? There's a very good reason they can tell this story over again. There's lots of different versions. Interesting chapter. I quite enjoyed it. The second one is The Great Cat Massacre from the title. And this is about how the cat massacre, actually a bunch of cats that were killed, was a metaphor for the workers striking at the bourgeois capitalists that ruin their lives every day, symbolically by killing the cats. What a shock. Unfettered capitalism ruins humans' lives. I know, I couldn't believe it. This was a very tough chapter for me to read because it dealt with lots of actual 18th century cruelty to animals. The 18th century people in Europe were not pleasant to cats. They tortured and murdered them for sport, as enjoyment, just to hear them scream. I did not enjoy that chapter. Then there was the bourgeois puts his world in order. An anonymous gentleman wrote a 426-page description of his city of Montpellier. In excruciating detail, 426 pages, and it helped not only to describe the place physically, but the social structures, how the church and its leadership functioned, how the middle class functioned, how the moneyed interests functioned. One of the groups that was given very short amounts of information, however, was the working class, who the author of this particular story looked down upon in a major way and didn't think they should ever be allowed to have the ability to read. Again, classism in action. Which is a story of a police inspector whose job it was to censor the writers of the 18th century in Paris, or in France in general. And so he kept dossiers on all these different writers, very famous writers. And while we don't have the full-blown dossiers, we do have the reports he appears to have written to himself. in incredible detail, where he discusses not only whether they are a danger or not, but what kind of character they had, and his opinion of their writing, which was very interesting. 5, which deals with the Encyclopedia, which was the first attempt to come up with a true encyclopedia written by Diderot, and influenced heavily by the whole concept that is, in essence, the highest standard in the society that you could aspire to was being a philosopher. Not a shock. Diderot and his fellow writers were philosophers. And then we have the readers respond to Rousseau, which deals with a single man's passion of Émile Rousseau's writing. He wrote 47 letters to a publishing house in Geneva, and being the good Geneva bookkeepers that they were, they kept them all, along with the list of all the books he purchased. So people have now able to look at what he wrote, look at the books he read, and have a certain idea of how he thought about Rousseau, and how Rousseau's writing style and his basic philosophy about both writing and reading influenced this one particular man. Now, it was a very good book. I quite enjoyed it. Each essay is very distinct, but well written and easily understood by the layperson such as myself. It would have helped a lot if I spoke French. Let's face it, folks, I'm American. I barely speak English. But there are lots of terms in here, names, places, and phrases and things used in the book that are in pure French. I have no idea how to say them properly, and I feel that I missed out on quite a bit of the book because I did not speak French. Maybe it would be much more accessible to a person that does speak French. But in particular, actual French from France, and with an eye towards the 18th and 19th century. But overall, it was a good read. Now, did the author achieve his goal? Was I able to step into the shoes of an 18th century French citizen? I have no idea. I'm never going to meet an 18th century French citizen. I have no way of comparing what I now know to what the actual person was. But I do know that I now have a much better understanding of 18th century France. And that was my goal in reading the book. So if you have an interest in history, in well-written essays in general, and in France in specific, I would recommend this book.